Hello and welcome to a grand tour with my great grandad. My name is Ed Hill and this is the beginning of episode 52. So we're cracking on at a pace now. I've had a bit of spare time actually between jobs to do the recordings a bit more quickly. So that's why they're appearing more frequently than usual. If you're tuning in again, thanks very much. It's good to get regular listeners, and I hope you are enjoying this journey that I undertook more than 2 years ago now, following my grandfather and his travels around the world. So it's really appreciated if you are tuning in again and subscribing, and thanks for doing so. And at the same time, tell even more people about it as well, which is great. If you could do that, that'd be very helpful. If you're tuning in if you're tuning in for the first time, this podcast, A Grand Tour with my great granddad, is based, as you might guess, around the journals of my great grandfather, William Mowbray Scott, who was around in the sort of early to mid 19th century, so sort of 1840s, as a travelling around the world really as a steam engineer, and during that time he basically wrote these journals which still exist to this day, kind of basically recording his travels. He mainly says he did it for his family, who would be able to read them later on in their lives, particularly for his young children who may not have known where he was and what he was up to when they were very young. And certainly now we've got to Mexico, that is very much the case, because really it's not till about 18 months to 2 years on in his time in Mexico that his family finally get round to coming out there as well and joining him. So, it really is, I suppose, from his perspective, it was a useful way of letting his young children know what he'd been up to for those 2 years. And it's also, I think, the motivation really behind writing the whole of the journals in themselves, because basically I think he's on his own in the evenings with not much to do, and so he decides to undertake this task. And so he then looks back into his previous travels when he was in Europe about 4 years before, working as a engineer on a very early steam railway in Milan. He writes about all that time, and then when he gets to Mexico, he's writing more contemporaneously. That's it, yeah. So that's what he's doing. So that's what the podcast is about, basically. I read from the journals, and then I stop from time to time to discuss some of the things that William's talking about, or references he's made, or even just things that strike me as interesting that he's mentioned, because particularly some of the historical references that he makes are quite hard to decipher if you weren't born in 1840, basically, and aren't aware of them. So I kind of have to explain some of the history. And of course, the thing is, the places that he's talking about as well have changed enormously since 1840. So that sometimes kind of needs a bit of explanation as well. So, as I say at the beginning of most of these, actually all of these podcasts, if you want to contact me directly, there's various social media ways to do it. There's the X account or Twitter, which is Scott of the Historic, and that's at 3G Grand Tour. That's the number 3, so 3G Grand Tour, Scott of the Historic. If you put that in, it should come up, and you can direct message me that way. There's a Facebook account which is at Grand Tour with my great granddad. You can also message me that way, and there's a Blue Sky account, which is, I always have to remind myself of what that is. That's at scotsgrandtour.bsky.social. And I think if you just put in Ed Hill as well, it should come up. There's a Mastodon account, which is GG Grand Tour, and that's at Scotted. But to be honest, not many people seem to be going on to Mastodon these days. Since Mr. Musk has taken over Twitter, there's all these other comparatable, similar style social media things that have sprung up, but it's kind of hard to know which one is the one people are most interested in signing up to. But anyway, so maybe just stick with a Facebook page. Really, that's probably the best way. Anyway, so just to say also a little bit about where we were at the last episode when that finished. So William had spends most of his time in Zacatecas in central Mexico because that's where the mint is, and that's where he's being employed to introduce steam power into the minting and milling process of the coins. But also because it's very closely aligned with the mining industry, because the silver, obviously, that is extracted from the silver mines in Mexico is then used to make the coins. Actually, William goes on talking about as much about the mining industry as he does about the mint industry. In fact, probably more about the mining industry than the mint industry. But he's travelled to a nearby town of Zacatecas called Fresnillo, and he was at that. So that's where we'd got to at the end of the last episode, and he was sort of doing a tour with other expats, other Englishmen who've also gone to Mexico at that time to be involved in this industry, doing a bit of socialising, but also being shown around the mines and so forth. So that's basically where we were at the end of the last episode, and essentially that's continues into this episode, into episode 52. So he's still in Fresnillo with these other Englishmen and Irishmen. I think there are as well. I think there's some Americans. But anyway, he's being shown around. And that's really where we begin this episode. So I hope you enjoy it. June 30th, Sunday. Having slept at the house of Mr. Roberts, the chief engineer, they roused me at about 7 o'clock to accompany them to the market, which, as I said before, is held in the principal plaza and is supplied with fruit and vegetables of excellent quality. I partook of some figs of the most exquisite flavour I have ever tasted. During the time of our visit to the market, they were celebrating Mass in the parish church, which was crowded to excess. Vast numbers also were kneeling on the pavement in front. My friends having completed their purchases, we returned to the mine to breakfast, after which we mounted our horses and went to the Plateros mine, formerly in the possession of the Anglo-Mexican Company, but now belonging to the Fresnillo one. This mine was abandoned on account of the quantity of water, but they are now about to erect one of the steam engines standing at Fresnillo, the engine house being already built by Mr. Roberts, and he is expecting to get the mine drained this year. There is a circumstance connected with this mine that will show the way in which some of the mining companies have been managed in recent times. This mine was purchased by the Anglo Company, who sent out a number of Germans who had never seen a mine and of course knew nothing about the matter. They managed to make the company spend millions of dollars and never saw the bottom of the mine, or obtained a single bushel of ore from it. They built a large hacienda for the purpose of converting the ores before they knew what the mine contained. They also built a large house for the accommodation of their officers, which cost them $50,000, and finally sold it for $3,000. These places I also visited, and the erections were some of the best I had seen in the country. But the concern has now, however, got into the hands of spirited people, who there is no doubt will make the best of it. Having satisfied our curiosity in every respect, we went to the village that adjoins the mine and partook in the same refreshment, and then returned to Fresnillo at Mr. Rose, where 14 Englishmen, 2 English ladies, 2 Irishmen, and 1 Mexican sat down to an excellent repast, after which first wine, and then tea, and finally punch, and long tales and longer cigars, which brought us to the hour of midnight, when we reluctantly parted and retired to rest. July 1st. After breakfast, visited the hacienda belonging to the mine. This establishment is the largest of its kind in the world, and is the place where the ore undergoes the various processes to convert it into silver. It is in the shape of an immense square, surrounded by buildings, with a large courtyard in the centre. The buildings contain the requisite machinery for breaking, pounding, washing, and smelting the ore, and the courtyard is used for treading the ore by horses and mules. In consequence of being pinched for time, I was not able to procure so many particulars as I had wished, but as I intended to repeat my visit in a few weeks, I shall then probably be able to obtain all the information I require. The average weekly produce of the mine is 30 bars of silver, and the value of them is $36,000. The hacienda is, however, able of doing a much larger quantity of work. Later, dined and drank tea at Mr. Richard Rowe's house, after which a very cheerful convivial party was formed, and being my last evening at Fresnillo, we was exceedingly loath to separate, which event did not take place till past midnight. A number of songs were sung during the evening, two of which I was particularly struck by, and having been fortunate enough to obtain copies, I here subjoin them for your pleasure. So then William writes down the lyrics of these two songs. The first is called At Home in My Dear Native Isle, and the second is called England and Home, England my Father. So I thought what I'd do is I'd make an attempt at singing these songs, and I'll later on say a bit more about them. I won't do the songs in their entirety because they're rather long. But anyway, this is the first opening verse of At Home in My Dear Native Isle. I have traversed the world from the bright burning east to the rude frozen climes of the north. With the gay sons of France shared the dance and the feast, with Italians their music and mirth. But the home, the first home, fond memory endears, all alone in my heart seems to smile. Oh, there's nothing so sweet to my fancy appears as the home in my dear native isle. Right, apologies for that. I don't know if that was the tune. There's no records of what the actual melody was, but I thought I'd give it a go, see what you think. You could probably think, what a awful voice, but I shall explain more about that one later on. There's some information about that particular verse. This one, which is called England and Home, England my Father, there's not so much about, but I'll try and sing or give you an extract from it, maybe the first two verses. My fatherland, I pine to hear once more the dashing of the ocean spray upon the rocky shore, to feel the fresh and cooling breeze bring health upon its wings, and press the emerald turf again where many a daisy springs. My fatherland, how often in my dreams the scenes I had in my youth return, thy wooded hills, thy streams. The chalky cliffs, the towering, rise above the sandy shore, the beacon light to warn the ship where furious breakers roar. So, I sound rather like Rambling Sid Rumpole, which was a character that Kenneth Williams used to do on a comedy radio show called Round the Horn. And he used to come on as this rather silly folk singer. And he'd sing about things like his hands being caught in his court wanglers and stuff like this. So these sort of rural terms, which always sounded a bit rude. So that's my impression there. If you look Kenneth Williams up and Rambling Sid Rumpole, you'll get an idea of what I was talking about.
When I was a clencher's bogle man in famous Lincoln town, I often clenched my bogling fork for less than half a crown. And I would joggle and nurk my boys, as I shall quickly tell. Oh, 'tis my delight on a shiny night and a foggy night as well.
Right, I'm going to stop here just to say a little more about these two songs that Williams enjoyed when he's been in company with his fellow friends from the Fresnillo mine. Because I just wondered if there could be any sort of research that you could do to find more about their origins. So having looked into it, these songs both, I think, what's the first one called? It's called At Home in My Own Native Isle, I think it is, yes. At Home in My Dear Native Isle. And the other one, England and Home, England, My Fatherland, which, I don't know, whenever you use the word fatherland, it sort of has German sort of Nazi sort of connotations with it, doesn't it, fatherland? But anyway, this was in a period long before then, so they were using the word fatherland without that association. Anyway, so these songs were probably what were known as songs written or printed on what are called broadsides. So broadsides were basically very cheap little sheets of music, pamphlets of music. Well, they weren't really of music. They were literally just of the words of a song. And these were printed and distributed in towns and cities by printers who wanted to make a bit of money printing these kind of sentimental songs. And they're often about sort of longing for home and this sort of stuff. And so both these songs, there's no actual attribution possible to who the composer or creator might have been. It's most likely that these printers, they just employed, hack writers or hack poets, I suppose you'd say, to come up with a few verses along the sort of lines that they knew which would be popular with people and spread them among the population. Or they came from a kind of folk tradition. Sailors would sing these sort of songs whilst travelling abroad. So there's a kind of deep-rooted kind of folk tradition, or coming from a folk tradition, or certainly folk influence. But the sort of interesting thing about these broadside songs, which were widely known at this time, was that the reason they didn't have any actual musical notation written in the bit of paper that was given out was that they were usually sung to already well-known tunes. So something like Auld Lang Syne or something like Rule Britannia, or looking at this one, the research suggests that probably the most likely tune, it would have been sung to his Home Sweet Home. So when I said I didn't know the tune, in my own rendition, my own marvellous rendition of the songs, it might well have been to this tune of Home Sweet Home, which I haven't been able to look up yet, but maybe I should if I can find a copy of it actually being recorded. So really, the sort of situation that William's describing, where there's a group of people all gathered around in a parlour somewhere, or just singing this song together, is exactly the kind of situation where these songs would have been sung in. And as I say, because most people knew what the tune would have been already, because it was a familiar tune that would be universally used for many other songs, everyone could join in, I suppose. So that's what kind of made them popular. But there's this, particularly in this era of the 19th century, this sort of sentimental longing for home kind of ballad was very common. There was a couple of suggestions who it might have been written by. One of these writers is a woman called Eliza Cook. It could have been written by her, or another writer called Charles Jeffreys. So both those could have been possible, but it's more than likely it was just, there were many of these, as I say, hack writers writing these sort of poems at the time, or song ballads for these broadsides. So that's, I could have probably sung, and in fact the rumbling Sid Rumpo one is probably an exact example of it in a way, because the tune that he sings it to is a well-known one as well. So he was doing the same thing, but it is that kind of folky kind of thing. But William obviously enjoyed it. Of course, you have to remember, there was no such thing as radio or television to listen to in these days. We always this thing when I was going, well, we used to make our own entertainment, and and this is, of course, what people did. They sat round, had a few drinks, and sang songs together. So it's great, really, that I suppose it was a very social kind of thing to do, and perhaps a strong sense of community came out of it as well. How different from our own current times, when everyone just sits at home looking at their phone like that, scrolling, doom scrolling, as they say, from one thing to the next, as the algorithm mashes their brain. And we don't talk to each other, we just sit there in silence, looking at our smartphones. Ah, dear. But that's progress for you, isn't it? That's progress. July 2nd. Left Fresnillo at 8 in the morning and was accompanied by several of my friends to a small hamlet 3 leagues and a half from that place, where we finished a bottle of brandy and started for Zacatecas, which place I reached at 2 in the afternoon. Blimey, a bit early for brandy, isn't it? He doesn't know the old snifter, does he, old William? July 7th, Sunday. Rode out to the village of Guadalupe this morning, and then round to the Hacienda Bernardi, a beautiful spot situated about a league from Zacatecas in a fertile valley. There is also a church connected with this establishment, neatly fitted up, a neat garden, and very tolerable buildings. There are also 2 lakes of considerable size. The situation of the hacienda struck me as being one of the prettiest spots I have yet discovered in the neighbourhood of Zacatecas. This place formerly belonged to the United Mexican Mining Company, but I am not aware in whose possession it is at the present time. In the evening we had a procession from the church of San Juan de Diaz, the priests of which church, having got hold of a new image of the Virgin, got up a procession to grace the inauguration. The figures or idols, whichever you please to call them, consisted of San Pedro, San Joseph, with the infant Jesus in his arms, and the Virgin with a child in her arms also, which to me presented rather a curious anomaly, that the husband and wife should both have an infant in their arms to represent one person. Finished the evening at the Alameda, Vesper bell 5 minutes past 7. July 11th. Having occasion to visit the Hacienda Juan Alonso, situated on the outskirts of Zacatecas, on the Guadalupe road, I was much struck at observing the situation of a great number of swallows' nests, which I think is worthy of being recorded. The entrance to this hacienda is by a portico of considerable size, the ceiling of which is not more than 8 feet from the ground. From this is suspended the stuffed skin of a bear, and also several hawks of large size, with outstretched wings. Notwithstanding this, and that people are continually passing during the day, the ceiling was covered with the nests of swallows. I counted more than 100 of them, the birds not seeming the least alarmed at the continual noise of the people passing at every moment, but continued building their nests and feeding their young ones, as if in the midst of the deepest solitude. July 12th. An execution took place here this morning. The criminal, by the name of Basilico Romero, had been convicted of no less than 4 murders and 5 desertions from the army. He was a native Valparaisan and 30 years of age, and was described as a man of most violent passions and deep depravity. The particular murder for which he suffered the penalty of the law was committed in the night of the 24th of September 1842, on a person of the name of Silverio Moreno. Criminals are put to death here by an instrument called the garrote, which is similar to those used in Old Spain. This machine was erected just outside the city. The criminal is placed on a seat with his back against a post. A bent bar of iron is then fixed against his neck, and on the signal being given, the executioner withdraws a bolt, and a lever of about 4 feet in length, with a ball not weighing less than 200 pounds, immediately descends, which, with ball and lever being in connection with a multiplying screw and a bar at the back of the neck, forces the head forward, and the criminal is dead in a moment. In fact, the head was nearly separated from the body, though without any blood flowing. The number of people assembled was not very large, and they conducted themselves in a very orderly manner. The criminal was clothed in black robe and cap, with a red cross on the forehead, and he was escorted to the place of execution by a body of the priesthood. Okay, this is another point where I'm going to stop reading from the journal and discuss what William's been writing about. So a couple of things here, one rather pleasant and one not so pleasant. The first thing I thought I'd talk about is the swallows that he sees nesting under this big portico. So I just thought, I wondered what species of swallow they were. Now, they're probably most likely known in Mexico as a cave swallow, because they're the species that most likely nest under man-made structures, as well as sort of caves, as their name suggests, and cliffs and things like that. So that's probably the ones that William was looking at. Rather an attractive looking little bird, actually. It's got a kind of a pinkish orange sort of area above its on the top of its head and on its chest area, and quite short sort of stubby wings, not like the long tailed swallows that we get in Europe, but they're a native species of pretty well, I think, most of America, but particularly South America. And of course, it's quite an interesting little detail that they nest when there's a lot of people around as well, walking through this portico into the area of the town in Fresnillo, I think it is. But that's not unusual. I think I've sort of seen it myself. You quite often get birds nesting in surprisingly sort of public areas. I know, of course, as long as people ignore them, then they're perfectly happy to bring up their chicks there. So the thing that I thought I'd talk about, which wasn't so pleasant or isn't so pleasant, is obviously this dramatic execution scene that William describes in the town of Zacatecas, or city of Zacatecas, in the plaza. Now he calls it a grot. It's spelt G-A-R-O-T-E. When I originally wrote it, I wrote something without a T, carol, but I'm sure it was probably just William writing and he forgot to cross his T or something, because I can't find any reference of it being referred to as anything other than a garrote. A garrote, I don't know. Maybe I should look up what the Spanish pronunciation of it would be. Anyway, obviously it's a grim thing to be used in any situation to execute people. The one that William describes is a little bit different. He refers to the system used in old Spain, which was basically, sadly, or grimly, the occupant would sit on a chair with their back against this post and then this metal band round their neck, and that was generally tied to a screw, but it was a hand screw mechanism. So the execution would be by turning this screw rather slowly. The band would get tighter and tighter around the victim's neck, and obviously sort of suffocate them, really. So it was rather a slow death, compared to something like hanging, where or even a guillotine, where it's almost instantaneous, of course, the death. So it was rather a slow method of execution as described in Old Spain, and the mechanism used in Old Spain. But William, interestingly, refers to this one where there's a big lever that's attached to a big weight that's suspended in the air, and then obviously someone pulls out a bolt and then this thing comes crashing down, which is then linked to the mechanism, and obviously much more instantaneously tightens the band around the neck, and as William rather grimly says, nearly separated the head from the neck. Now, although I haven't really been able to find a picture of this exact type of version of this method of execution, I've only been able to find pictures of the old version where it's a screw mechanism, a hand screw mechanism. There are accounts of the type of thing that William's talking about. So in that sense, it was obviously thought of as being a bit more sophisticated because, the death was much more instantaneous than using the slower screw method. This is all rather grim and not very nice to talk about. I know, as ever, sometimes these things, when William's describing, you sort of sometimes think what are his priorities and his sort of moral feelings about things, because he seems more concerned about the fact that the people watching this execution all behaved themselves well and were fairly respectable, and it was carried out in a degree of silence. It may well be that he's comparing this to executions, public executions, which at this time were taking place in UK and in London. Because although they weren't that frequent, when they did happen, they were, big events attended by a lot of people. They became known as being rather rowdy events with people not behaving very well, drinking rather a lot. I could almost describe it as being like a crowd at a football match. And certainly in the time of William's era, they were increasingly being thought of as being, not a good idea to do things anymore in this way, in this public way, because it didn't engender good behaviour from the general public, and some people thought it didn't really act as a deterrent either. The last actual public execution in the UK was in, I think, 1868. So there'd been this gradual feeling as time went by that these things really shouldn't be happening in public anymore. So that may be why William is making this comparison with the behaviour of the crowd in Mexico compared to the crowd in London. Although, given the rate of crime that William talks about that was going on in Mexico and going on in Zacatecas at this time, I imagine these events happened much more frequently than they were happening in London. But there you are. As you read on in the journals, you will understand why I mentioned that. Just to add that this particular criminal being put to death, this Basilico Romero, it doesn't sound very nice, does he? After 4 murders, I think he probably did have it coming to him, although he was only convicted for one, it seems. So I don't know. 3 murders is fine. You don't get executed for that, but 4th, that's too many. So yeah. Then by that time you've definitely got to meet your maker. July 14th, Sunday. Rode down to the Hacienda La Granja at the village of Guadalupe and breakfasted with Mr. John Clements, the administrator, after which we took a pleasant ride across the country, and he returned with me to Zacatecas. In the evening, which was exceedingly pleasant, I went to the top of the Bufa mountain, the fineness of the weather having caused a great many people to assemble there. Vesper bell, 2 minutes past 7. July 21st, Sunday. grand festival at the church of Nuestra Sonora on the summit of the Bufa mountain. Walked up there in the afternoon and found an immense number of people assembled and the church crowded to excess. A band of music was placed on the topmost nest of the rocks, and young people of both sexes were climbing over the crags and playing about in all directions, giving the scene an appearance like anything but that of a religious festival. During the time I was strolling about, I had an opportunity of witnessing the power of the priesthood in this bigoted and degraded country. A very respectable dressed female, who standing at the entrance of the cloisters, so this means she was counting, telling her beads and repeating her Aves, Hail Marys basically, and Credo with considerable gesticulation and outward fervour. This had attracted my attention, and I was wondering within myself what had caused her to choose this spot for her devotions, when she suddenly went down upon her knees and went up on them to the door of the church, a distance of at least 120 yards. On making inquiries, I found that this was a penance inflicted by the priesthood for some small transgression. Well, this is in the middle of the 19th century, and by open daylight, and supposedly a specimen of the advancing liberality of the Church of Rome, though at the same time there is not more than 3 countries in the world where they would have allowed it to take place, viz. Spain, Portugal, and this doubly bigoted, ignorant and benighted and unenlightened country. Vesper bell 2 minutes past 7. July 28th, Sunday. Nothing particular today. Vesper bell 7 o'clock. There's these odd curiosities in the journal where he writes things, and you do think, why did he write that, It's like including a poem really that's got nothing to do with anything else that he's written about, actually in the journal. July 29th. Hacienda La Granja. Had an invitation to breakfast this morning with Mr. Clements, the administrator of this hacienda, and afterwards had a full opportunity of seeing the whole process which the ore of silver undergoes from it being first brought from the mine until it is converted into bars of silver, which I will endeavour to describe as plainly as possible. The ore is brought from the mine in pieces about the size of a man's fist. It is then placed under the stampers, moved by mules. These stampers are upright pieces of wood, 4 inches square, and shod with iron fixed in frames, each frame containing 20 stampers. There is here 2 stamping mills, and the ore under these is reduced to a coarse powder. The next operation is the removal of the ore to the grinding tubs, of which the number is 24. These tubs are 8 feet in diameter and 2 in depth. An upright shaft is fixed in the centre to which a cross is attached, and to each arm of the cross a large stone is secured by ropes. The ore is placed in these tubs with a certain quantity of water and ground for 16 hours. Each tub is worked by 2 mules. This operation finished, the material is removed to the patio or large square court in the centre of the hacienda. Here it is laid in circles of 100 feet in diameter and about a foot in depth. A quantity of quicksilver, so that's mercury, a quantity of quicksilver and salt is now added to it, and it is turned every day and trodden by horses for 6 hours every morning. It is also frequently examined to see that there is sufficient quantity of quicksilver, which is added if needed. This part of the process requires about 3 weeks. When the material is found to be in a proper state, it is taken to the washing mill. This tub is 6 feet in diameter and the same in depth. An upright shaft is immersed in the centre of it, to which a cross is attached, from the arms of which a great number of pieces of wood radiate in various directions, so as to keep the material in a constant state of agitation. A very considerable quantity of water is added to it during this process, and at certain intervals the mules are urged to their full speed, while a valve in the tub is opened, and the water and earthy particles are allowed to escape. During this part of the process, the quicksilver causes the silver to adhere to it, and of course by its gravity collects at the bottom of the tub. This washing is continued for 3 days alternately, letting off the water and mud and putting in fresh material. When sufficient quantity is collected at the bottom, which there is in the time I have mentioned, all the refuse is drawn off, and the bottom of the tub then has the appearance of a looking glass placed at the bottom. The amalgam, as it is called, is then very carefully collected and placed in another tub and washed with clean water. This completed, the whole of it is then taken and poured into a conical canvas bag, suspended over a large stone cistern, where the quicksilver, which is yet in a liquid state, escapes into the cistern below, leaving what is termed the dry amalgam in the bag, about 1/3 of which is pure silver. The next step is to make it into triangular pieces by means of iron moulds, which done, it is removed to the burning house. In this place there is a bed formed of brickwork in which semicircular vessels are placed. Over these is laid a metal plate, and upon it the triangular pieces before mentioned are laid, pieces of writing paper being placed between each horizontal layer. They are placed in this way to the height of 3 feet, when a copper bell is lowered over the whole. At some distance round the outside of this, an erection of brickwork is placed, the space between the two filled with charcoal, which is ignited, and the process of burning commences. In consequence of this application of heat, the quicksilver flies off in the shape of vapour, and is condensed in the circular vessel below, leaving the pure metallic silver on the plates. It is then melted into bars, and taken to the mint for the purpose of being coined into dollars. Okay, I'm going to stop here again to describe more in detail about this Patio process of extracting silver from the ore that William's giving a description of here, and it's a pretty thorough one. I have to say he sort of later in the third journal describes it again in even more depth, sort of mentioning the sort of amounts of various ingredients used as well. So it's an even more thorough kind of explanation of it. But basically, the whole Patio process was a very important one because basically the ore in Spain, in New Spain as it was called then, in many instances wasn't that high grade, i.e. it didn't have that higher content of silver. And in fact, silver is rarely found just on its own. It's often in an ore, and it has to be extracted through various processes. Smelting is the other one. But smelting is basically the kind of, if you like, go-to way of doing it, where you heat the ore and basically you use a combination of heat and the chemical reaction created by the heat to extract the silver from the ore. But the Patio process was revolutionary because it meant you could extract silver out of much lower grade ores, with less silver content in them. In fact, I think it says around about 80% of the silver could be extracted from the ore, which is a pretty high percentage. And it was invented by a chap called Bartolome de Medina. Now, he had grown up in Spain. He wasn't actually a scientist, really. He was a merchant, but he did become very interested in the idea of being able to extract silver more efficiently from the ores. And he apparently trained with some guy, I think it was in Germany, was it? I think, I might be wrong there. Anyway, he learnt about this process. But then he, quite late in his age, because he was 50, went to South America, to Mexico, and he then experimented because he was convinced that this process of kind of amalgamation, I think is the other version that you could call it, which William refers to as called as well. So it's mercury and silver amalgamation. He felt that this could work with lower grade ores, and so he experimented with it when he went to Mexico. He built his own hacienda and developed the process there. And apparently the key sort of breakthrough was that this adding of the copper sulfate. So with the Patio process, that William's describing here, what was good about it in Mexico is that it didn't use heat much, just at the end, really, at the end of it, where you were finally extracting the very last of the silver from the mercury amalgam. It was relatively low cost because you didn't need a lot of fuel, i.e. heat, fuel to create heat, because you just basically, it's why it's called the Patio process. As William described it, you spread this mixture of the crushed ore and the sort of mud and the copper sulfate, and the mercury, and you spread it out on these patios in the sun, and then it was constantly turned. And this is why the process took weeks, as William describes, mules and men turning it over and over again, spreading it out, perhaps adding a bit more copper sulfate, a bit more mercury for this process to keep working. So it would actually take weeks from the beginning of the process to the end of it to get to the final pure silver. But, it was a relatively low-tech way of doing it and didn't cost much. Of course, apart from the terrible damage that it did not only to the people working with the mercury, but to the environment. Mercury is an extremely... William keeps referring to it as quicksilver, but it's mercury. It's extremely poisonous compound, and when it's heated as well, the vapors from it are terribly dangerous. So you can imagine the workers are working around it were absolutely destroying their health using it, and also then a lot got lost into the actual environment. And apparently there are areas of Mexico and Peru, I think, today that are still badly contaminated with the mercury that was used in the Patio process. But it went on a long time after William's time there. It still carries on late into the 19th century because it was still the kind of most efficient way in that country to extract the silver ore. And I think, I saw a quote here, said up until the 1900s, Mexico was supplying 3/5 of the world's silver. Basically, William gives a very, detailed description of it here, but as I say, later on, it's even more in depth. And the reason it was basically so important was it upped the production of silver tremendously, because you could then not only use the smelting process for the ores where there was a high percentage of silver in them, which was a relatively simple process, but you could then obviously expand it to the lower grade ores that were being mined. And of course, that meant that there was just a lot more silver being produced from New Spain, which basically is what Mexico became, was named before the Mexican Revolution and the revolution to break away from Spain's power. So the Mexico that Will is in is inheriting this whole process, and of course it was lucrative for that country, and very important part of its economy to be able to supply this silver mainly through silver dollars to the rest of the world. It has to be said, it's one of those industrial processes that obviously wouldn't be allowed today because of the terrible environmental impact that it has, and it later got replaced by other more efficient systems, so it's not used anymore. But it does strike me, the one thing that must have been amazing about what Medina did really was it must have been a really whole process of trial and error, trying a little bit more mercury, a little bit more copper sulfate. It must have taken him many iterations to keep trying it to get this system to work, considering it was something that took weeks. It wasn't a kind of chemical reaction that happened in a moment. The whole process took weeks. So, to know that if something was working well, it's quite amazing, really, how he developed it. You could say, especially as he wasn't really a scientist, he was just a merchant who had this particular interest in this, wanting to create this efficient system to get more silver. But I suppose if your motivation was money and stuff like that, I don't think he died a particularly rich man. I think he got a patent for inventing the process, and whether he earned more money from that, I don't know. I don't know how long he lived for either, so whether he could enjoy his riches, because he was pretty old to go out to to go out to Mexico at the age of 50 and start this process. Apparently he probably didn't die very wealthy, despite inventing this, revolutionary process. As it says, his invention made other people rich rather than himself. Rather interestingly, he donated quite a lot of the royalties from his patent to a orphanage for girls. So a large proportion of his wealth went there, which was obviously a heartening philanthropic gesture, which suggests that he wasn't driven totally by greed, put it that way. And but they don't actually know when he died. There's no record of when he actually died. There's records that he was still around in his hacienda and drawing money from his patents in the 1860s. So at least he got to that sort of era in terms of age. But they don't. There's no actual kind of concrete date of death, which suggests that he wasn't exactly wealthy and didn't exactly benefit hugely from his own invention. So there we are. At least he sounds like a good person, to put it simply. Was he a bad person or was he a good person? This is the sort of kind of things I have to explain to my daughter in these terms. He was a good person. So I mean, it's all relative, isn't it? I mean, you could say he was a good person that he donated this money to the orphanage, but the process himself was causing terrible, terrible health problems for the workers who had to use the mercury that he'd discovered worked in this Patio process. So, that's the way of the world. It's complicated, isn't it? You invent a process that's environmentally damaging, injurious to health, makes profits really for, let's face it, probably greedy mine owners and silver merchants. And but you give a lot of that money to some orphanage somewhere to, appease the bad side of things. It's a bit like the greenwashing, isn't it, that people talk about, the oil companies in being involved in here. Oh, yes, we do terrible damage to the environment. That, we do recycle our paper in the office. I'm sure there was quite a lot of religious instinct in there as well from Bartolome, as well as to why he was donating this money. But it's good to hear. I mean, of course, he probably wouldn't have been aware at that time of what the terrible health outcomes that were being caused by the mercury, as a lot of these things is only later discovered how detrimental they were to people's health. A bit like the matchstick girls in London who were licking the sulphur, I think, all the time on the when they were making these matches. That got them Fossi-jaw, I think it was, where part of their chins dropped off. So I shouldn't be laughing. It's not funny, is it? People's jaws dropping off. Anyway, yeah. But anyways, the 19th century was basically like that, wasn't it? There was a lot of let's just to hell with what the outcome in terms of how this actually affects people. Let's just think of processes and inventions that make money. Still going on today, the whole debate about smartphones and that. How injurious is it to health in 50 years' time? Will we be looking back and going, what we were thinking? What were we thinking? Anyway, as I've said before, what goes around comes around. Right, that's the end of episode 52. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think there were some interesting moments there, some nice and not so nice. The whole thing of that element of William singing songs with his fellow expats in the Fresnillo mine there, or the parlour of where they are all staying together. it is interesting, I suppose. Maybe in a way they were like sailors, abroad in that sense. This whole sort of cohort of Englishmen who transferred their lives to Mexico at this time. I suppose they did feel a little bit far away from home in the same way that sailors did. So maybe that's why they all took to singing these kind of sentimental songs about the old country, as it were. And of course, then the horrible sort of scene of the public execution using this garrote machine. As he says, it seems a particularly gruesome way to carry out an execution, but there we are. I don't know. Is there ever a good way? Is lethal injection any better than electrocution? And I don't know. At the end of it, basically it's someone being killed. I don't know if you can ever really make that humane. But it kind of, I think it does show quite a strong contrast with William's time in Europe compared to his time in Mexico. I think as you do go on through the journals, there's this feeling much more that Mexico is a more, edge of the frontier sort of place where the society is still kind of establishing itself, and the kind of perhaps the social conventions and norms that were more evident in Europe, those traditions of society aren't quite there yet. So yeah, it's an interesting contrast. It's definitely a more lawless place, certainly, than is demonstrated when William's travelling around Europe. So, just to say again, there are all those usual ways that you can contact me direct, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, through the social media. So that's the Twitter account or X account, the Facebook page. There's actually a Mastodon account as well, and a Blue Sky account. So they're all there. So if you put in Scott the Historical or Grandad with my great granddad somewhere, some of those things should show up, hopefully. And it's good to see that we begin getting a rise in more listeners lately, so that's great as well. So that's it really. In the next episode, William kind of is continuing his time at the Fresnillo mine, and the time he spent there kind of learning more about the process of extracting the silver from the ore, and also an interesting anecdote about the Apache Indians as well. So that's something to look forward to. But that is it, as I say, for episode 52. So if you have been, thanks for tuning in.